All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to dive in.
Well, today we're looking at U.S.-China relations, but through a pretty specific lens.
Okay, yeah.
We've got this op-ed that's been making the rounds, written by Representative John Mulinar.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, he's the chairman of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party.
Ah, right.
And he lays out, 5 big threats he sees coming from the CCP.
5. Okay, this will be good.
Published on Fox News back in April of this year, so fairly recent.
All right, so what kind of threats are we talking?
Oh, everything from fentanyl to, economic dominance, even some concerns right here in the U.S.
Oh, wow. Okay, getting right to the heart of it.
Yeah, so let's jump in, see what Mulinar has to say.
Sounds good.
So right away, he talks about this trip he took to Taiwan earlier this year.
Okay.
He went with some other committee members and came back, with this, renewed sense of urgency.
How about?
The CCP's military ambitions.
Right, always a hot topic.
He really thinks we need to be prepared for a potential conflict there. Says economic measures alone might not be enough to, deter them.
So he's thinking more than sanctions, more than just diplomacy.
Yeah, he's talking about needing to be ready for actual military action.
Wow, that's pretty serious.
Yeah, and he specifically mentions, expanding training programs for Taiwan's military.
Makes sense.
And getting weapons to them faster, speeding up those deliveries.
It's interesting, though, this whole question of how much is enough,
Right.
Where's the line between deterring something and actually provoking it?
Yeah, it's that balance, right?
It's like what we're seeing in other global conflicts, too, that same debate.
It's true. Everything's so interconnected now. It's not just about Taiwan and China.
Exactly. There are ripple effects everywhere you look.
Okay, but moving on from Taiwan for now,
Okay.
Mulinar's second point hits closer to home for a lot of people, I think.
All right. What's
The fentanyl crisis.
yeah, that's a tough one.
He's citing this report from his committee, by the way. It was a bipartisan report.
Okay.
And they found that China produces 97% of the world's fentanyl precursors.
97%. Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, and even more alarming, the report says the CCP is actually subsidizing those exports.
Hold on, they're subsidizing it.
And they're even tipping off traffickers when the U.S. is cracking down.
Seriously?
Yeah.
That's a whole other level of involvement.
Right. It's not just like a passive thing. It's way more active, almost sinister,
Yeah, definitely adds a whole other layer to the opioid crisis.
We're not just talking addiction and public health anymore. It's international drug control. It's geopolitics.
And it makes you wonder, how do you even address a crisis like this when you might have a foreign power playing a part?
Yeah, it's a huge question.
Huge.
So, okay, we've got Taiwan, we've got fentanyl, both pretty heavy topics.
Yeah, and they're kidding.
And Mulinar doesn't stop there. His third point takes us into the economic arena.
Okay, what's he got there?
He's saying the CCP wants to dominate key parts of the global economy.
I mean, that's not exactly surprising, is it?
No, but he gets specific. He talks about especially industries that are critical to U.S. interests, like electric vehicles, rare earth minerals, places where China already has a big presence.
Right.
And to illustrate this point, he brings up CATL.
CATL.
It's a Chinese battery manufacturer. They've partnered with some U.S. automakers, actually.
Oh.
And Mulinar highlights that this company, they get huge subsidies from the CCP, and they even have these things called internal party cells operating within the company.
Internal party cells? What does that even mean?
So it's basically like extensions of the CCP right within the company.
Like to make sure the party's got control.
Exactly, to ensure their influence.
That raises some questions about how much autonomy these companies really have.
And what it means for U.S. businesses, for national security even.
Right. It's not just about healthy competition anymore. It's a bit more complicated.
It's about potentially giving a rival a big advantage, and not just any rival, one that's closely tied to the CCP.
And it gets even trickier when you consider that China's flooding the market with cheap EVs right now.
Right.
Putting pressure on U.S. automakers to partner with companies like CATL. It's like, do we become reliant on a company potentially under the CCP's thumb?
How do you balance the economics with the national security concerns?
Big questions.
Yeah, definitely questions worth thinking about.
Oh, absolutely.
And it doesn't stop there. Mulinar's fourth point brings it even closer to home, literally.
Oh. How so? He's saying that the CCP's influence, it's not just, international markets or potential conflicts.
Right.
It's happening here in the U.S., like right in our communities.
Okay, that's a little unsettling.
He uses this example of Goshen, a company trying to build a battery factory
Goshen. Okay.
in his district, actually, in Michigan.
Mhm.
And Goshen, they're a subsidiary of a Chinese company that straight up pledges allegiance to the CCP.
So this isn't just abstract economic competition anymore. It's getting real local.
Right. It's tangible.
Is there any pushback on this? I mean, a CCP-linked company setting up shop here, that's got to raise some eyebrows.
Oh, absolutely. Molinar points to testimony from some big names, former CIA directors.
Okay.
Leon Panetta, Mike Pompeo, served under both Democrats and Republicans.
Okay, so this isn't just a partisan thing.
Not at all. And both of them, they expressed serious concerns about letting these kinds of CCP-affiliated companies build facilities here.
What were they worried about specifically?
Well, economic espionage, of course, intellectual property theft,
Right, makes sense.
but also the potential for sabotage, attacks on critical infrastructure, stuff like that.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just about stealing secrets. It's about potential disruption, even attacks.
Exactly. It really highlights those national security risks.
And having former CIA directors from both sides of the aisle saying this, that's got to carry some weight.
This definitely adds to the seriousness of Molinar's argument.
It's not just some political posturing.
And it's not hypothetical either.
What do you mean?
Molinar brings up the fact that the CCP, they've already been operating illegal police stations here in the U.S.
Bulldog, what?
Targeting dissidents, silencing critics.
That's pretty bold.
Right. I mean, it's not subtle.
It's like the lines are getting blurred between, legitimate business and something way shadier.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what's next. What other ways are they trying to exert influence?
Well, that's a perfect segue, actually, because Molinar's fifth point, it's all about that, the CCP's propaganda, social media manipulation.
Okay, interesting.
He specifically calls out TikTok.
TikTok, yeah. Can't escape it these days.
Right. It's everywhere, especially popular with the younger generations.
And Molinar's argument is that the CCP's using that reach to influence public opinion, spread disinformation, shape how young Americans see the world.
I've heard some concerns about TikTok before, but what kind of content are we talking about here?
Well, there's been accusations of them promoting pro-Hamas content during conflicts. Reports of videos that, portray Osama bin Laden favorably, almost trying to rewrite history.
Oh, that's a bit much.
And it goes beyond that. Even incidents where children were encouraged on TikTok to, contact members of Congress about certain legislation.
So it's not just harmless videos and memes. It's potentially manipulation on a huge scale.
Right. Raises questions about how foreign governments can use these platforms,
To manipulate public discourse, maybe even undermine democratic values.
It's a new battleground, information warfare, and we're still figuring out the rules.
Makes you wonder what's off limits in this competition with the CCP. They seem to be coming at us from every angle.
Economic, military, technological, now cultural, it's a lot.
Is there any part of our lives that's not being impacted by this?
It's a tough question. It's a complex challenge, definitely demands a comprehensive response,
Yeah, not a simple fix.
We need action from the government, from businesses, even individuals. Can't just be passive about it.
It feels like we're at this crucial point in U.S.-China relations. What Molinar's laying out here, it's pretty sobering.
It is, but what's striking is that this isn't some fringe viewpoint. He's the chairman of a powerful committee.
Right.
And you hear these same concerns from lawmakers on both sides. It's a bipartisan issue, which is, not that common these days.
So it's not just political maneuvering, it's something deeper.
It speaks to the seriousness of the situation.
And Molinar's not just, throwing his hands up. He's calling for action.
Right.
He says we need to use our strengths, our values, our principles to counter the CCP's aggression.
Push back, basically.
Yeah, he's saying we can't just let this happen. We need to fight back. But it makes you wonder, what does winning even look like in this situation?
Is it military dominance? Economic superiority? It's not as obvious as it might seem.
What does victory look like in this kind of competition? Yeah, it's a big question, right? If we don't know what winning looks like, how do we know if we're even going in the right direction?
It's a good point. And Molinar, he says, we need to leverage American values in this whole competition. Things like freedom, democracy, the rule of law.
So it's not just about beating China. It's about promoting a certain vision of the world.
Exactly. One that aligns with those principles.
Okay, so supporting democratic movements, holding authoritarian regimes accountable, making sure our own system reflects those values, that kind of thing.
Right, it's bigger than just us versus them.
Which brings us back to this idea of competition. Molinar keeps framing it as this rivalry between two systems, two different futures. Do you think that's the right way to look at it?
I mean, it's definitely one way to frame it, especially now, with the current geopolitical climate.
Yeah.
But it's also important to remember that the U.S.-China relationship, it's complicated.
Right. It's not that simple.
There are areas where we cooperate, shared interests, even potential to work together on things like climate change.
It's not just black and white, good versus evil.
It's way more nuanced than that.
But there are these fundamental differences in how our systems work, what we prioritize.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And those differences, they have real consequences. They play out in the real world.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to understand just how complex this relationship really is.
Not about demonizing China or pretending there's some kind of monster.
Right. It's about recognizing the challenges, engaging in a smart, strategic way.
So Molinar's op-ed, it definitely raises a lot of questions, makes you think critically about where things are headed with the U.S. and China.
Definitely.
And it's not just about government policy or what diplomats are doing. It affects all of us,
It's a conversation that needs to happen everywhere, at all levels of society.
For sure.
And it needs to be nuanced. People need to think critically, be willing to hear different perspectives.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
What should people keep in mind as they, try to navigate this whole situation?
Well, the biggest thing is staying informed, staying engaged. We can't just be passive observers in all of this.
It's easy to tune it out, but we can't afford to.
We got to educate ourselves, understand the different sides, make our voices heard on the things that matter.
Absolutely. Can't just sit back and expect other people to figure this out for us.
Exactly. It's up to each of us.
So learn, participate, advocate for the future you want to see.
And remember, understanding the challenges from the CCP, it doesn't mean we have to, isolate ourselves or refuse to engage with China.
Right. It's not about shutting them out completely.
It's about going into this relationship with open eyes, understanding what we're dealing with, and always standing up for our own values, our own interests.
Well said. That's a good note to end on.
Yeah.
So there you have it, our deep dive into those 5 threats outlined by Representative Molinar. It's a lot to take in, I know.
It is.
But hopefully, this conversation gave you some things to think about, maybe even inspired you to learn more about this whole issue.
Always good to keep learning.
So until next time, keep diving deep. Stay curious.